I bet a lot of my subscribers are night owls. Honestly, I'm one too. Whenever night falls, I can't resist the urge to hit the bars, stroll the streets, or grab some late-night snacks. Well, if you share this habit, you might want to check out the first story in this episode. Who knows, it might just make you rethink your late-night adventures. This video contains 3 true creepy stories shared by Chinese netizens. If you enjoy them, don't forget to give it a thumb up and hit that subscribe button. Every Saturday night, I'll bring you spine-chilling horror stories and fascinating mysteries from Asia. In 2003, I got accepted into an art college in Shanghai, and it was my first time experiencing the vibrant charm of a big city. I quickly fell in love with the place. This story happened during my senior year when I started an internship. I had rented a small apartment and was living on my own, taking on some commercial gigs to make money. I was doing well financially, so I saved up and bought myself a Mazda. Driving around the city late at night, letting the wind blow through my hair became my favorite pastime. However, this habit would almost cost me my life. I remember it clearly. It was a summer night. After a performance that ended close to 10 p.m., the heat was still unbearable. Tired and irritable, I quickly changed out of my costume, removed my makeup, and went out for a late-night meal with some friends. After that, I hung out for a while, then finally headed home around 2 p.m. At home, I had a schnauzer named Pudding. Normally, I'd take him for a walk after work, but it was already too late, so I just played with him for a bit before heading to bed. Usually, Pudding slept by the bedroom door where it was cooler. No matter how much I tried to coax him into bed, he'd always refuse. But that night was different. He jumped onto the bed immediately and cuddled up right next to me as I turned off the lights. I found it a bit odd, but I didn't push it away. How could I, when it was just so adorable? I don't know how long I'd been asleep when his barking woke me up. I instinctively reached over to pat his rear to calm him down, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man standing next to my bed. He was about 5 feet 7 inches, dressed in a dark Zhongshan suit, with slicked black hair and a face that covered with a fog. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel he was staring at me with a taunting expression. My first thought was a burglar had broken in, but then I realized I didn't own anything valuable enough to fight over, just a laptop. So I decided to pretend to be asleep and wait for him to leave. I lay there with my eyes closed, barely breathing, straining to listen for any movement. That's when I noticed something even stranger. On the other side of the bed, where Pudding was, a woman was sitting. She had her back to me, her figure slender, draped in what looked like a black trench coat, with long black hair cascading down her back. At that moment, I knew something was very wrong. What kind of thief just sat there without stealing anything? And there were 2 of them. So I snapped my eyes open, but in the blink of an eye, both of them were gone. I checked the time. It was nearly 4 a.m. and dawn was approaching. Thinking I might have imagined it, I shrugged it off and got up, grabbed a drink from the fridge, and settled on the couch to watch TV until I eventually dozed off around 8 a.m. When I woke up, the incident had already slipped my mind, but something weird lingered. While I didn't fall ill like people usually do after a ghost encounter, I constantly feel cold. An eerie, bone-deep chill that didn't make sense in Shanghai's sweltering summer heat. I even stopped using the air conditioner and wrapped myself in a blanket, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I thought it might be a cold, so I took some meds and even tried cupping therapy, but nothing worked. A few days later, as my theater group started late-night rehearsals, I often returned home around midnight. But each time I opened the door, Pudding would bark like crazy and rush out. One night, as soon as I opened the door, he bolted down the hallway as if running for his life, barking all the way. Its frantic behavior gave me a fright, and I quickly ran after it, worried it might disturb the neighbors. Finally, I caught it at the stairwell and scooped it up to take it home. It kept trembling in my arms and growling softly. I tried to calm it down, but it didn't work. Just as I was about to reach my front door, I looked up and froze. There were two people standing right outside my door, the same ones I saw that night. They were still with blurry faces, standing motionless and staring at me. Panicked, I flipped on the hallway light and they vanished instantly. That was it for me. I didn't even bother closing the door, just grabbed pudding and ran downstairs. I only stopped when I reached the courtyard, my legs like jelly and my hands trembling uncontrollably. As I replayed everything that had happened, I became more and more certain. Those two figures definitely weren't human. I didn't know why, but I was sure they had latched onto me. There was no way I was going back home tonight. I felt utterly helpless. I wanted to check into a hotel, but the fear of them following me made me hesitate. So I drove to a bathhouse instead, figuring the crowded, bustling environment would keep me safe. I managed to check into a hotel without any issues, but pudding wasn't allowed inside. After some back and forth and slipping the front desk clerk a small tip, they finally agreed to let pudding stay at the front desk. So we made it through the night, waiting anxiously for daylight. As soon as morning came, I called two friends for help. When we met, I told them everything that had happened. They agreed this definitely wasn't just my imagination. Fortunately, one of them knew an old lady who was a medium and suggested we could ask her for help. The old lady lived in the courtyard of a logistic company. Her home was modestly furnished, but there was one unique area partitioned off in the living room. The wall there was covered with a single piece of red cloth, and below it was a table holding an incense burner, silk flowers, and several statues of deities. When we arrived, she had just come back from grocery shopping. We quickly stood up to greet her and briefly explain what had happened to me. Smiling warmly, she said, "See, you young people love to stay out late. This is the consequences." She then instructed me to wash my hands and light incense in front of the red cloth. Afterward, she started smoking, humming something under her breath, and drawing symbols on yellow paper with the incense stick. After some time, she told me the truth. My late night habits had weakened my young energy, and one night, at an intersection, I had unknowingly brought home the spirits of a man and a woman who had died in a car accident. She assured me she could help send them away. Feeling like I had found a lifeline, I immediately confirmed her description, telling her I had indeed seen a man and a woman, but could never clearly make out their faces. The old lady nodded seriously and warned, "If you had seen their faces, you wouldn't be alive now." Then I brought her back to my apartment. But to be honest, even with her there, I couldn't shake the unease I felt. The old lady inspected my home, placed several talismans around the rooms, and told me they would provide temporary relief. She then gave me a list of things to prepare: a piece of red cloth, spirit money, incense, new bedding, and a red outfit for the deity. She also instructed me to have two unmarried male friends present the next evening for the ritual. Finally, the second night arrived. The old lady brought the red cloth from her home and hung it on my wall. She then cut a series of red paper figures and had me burn them in a metal basin. At 11:15 p.m., she told me to put on the red outfit, lie down on the bed, and cover myself with the new bedding. She placed the paper figures on the blanket, then began tapping lightly with a small pitchfork stick while chanting. Finally, she handed my friends some incense and spirit money, instructing them to burn it at the crossroads outside. When the ritual was finished, she told us to stay in the apartment until dawn, assuring us that everything would be fine by then. After she left, my friend and I stayed up watching TV and sharing ghost stories until we unknowingly drifted off on the sofa. The exhaustion of the past few days had caught up with us, and when I woke up, it was nearly noon. Sure enough, when I woke up, I could feel the change in the apartment's atmosphere. That bone-chilling cold that made my hair stand on end was completely gone. I stayed there for another week or so before moving out. The experience had been so terrifying that I couldn't shake the psychological shadow, let alone continue living there. I can assure you this story is 100% true because my cousin had an almost identical experience. She's a nurse, and during her early years as a trainee, she worked long hours, leaving early and coming back late without much exposure to sunlight. On top of that, her birth chart was naturally weak, So one time, while passing through a crossroads, something strange happened. After returning home, she started running a fever that wouldn't go away no matter what treatment she tried. Then, she began having recurring dreams of a woman in a red dress leaning against the sycamore tree in her backyard, smiling at her. She couldn't make out the woman's face, but she could feel the smile. After a few days of this, the family realized something was seriously wrong. In the end, they had to call in a spiritual healer to resolve the issue. I think it might be because, in Chinese feng shui theories, crossroads are considered places with heavy yin energy, making them hotspots for wandering spirits and ghosts. A few days ago, I went on a business trip to Guangzhou and took the chance to catch up with an old classmate from middle school. We found a restaurant and spent hours chatting about everything under the sun. At some point, the conversation turned to supernatural encounters. To my surprise, my friend's face suddenly turned serious, and he said, when it comes to these things, it's better to believe than not to believe. Intrigued, I pressed him for details, and he reluctantly admitted that something strange was happening in his own home. My friend works at a factory and, for convenience, rented an apartment nearby, bringing his family along. The building had 3 two-bedroom units, and he shares one with his older brother. For some time now, every night between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., they've heard the distinct sounds of high heels clicking and marbles dropping on the floor. At first, he assured it was the kids upstairs playing around, but when he checked, he discovered the upstairs tenant was an elderly man who went to bed early and couldn't possibly be the source of the noise. That's when things started feeling off. When he finished, I couldn't help but laugh. Oh, come on. Haven't they already debunked this? Those noises are caused by fungi growing in the concrete. But my friend shook his head emphatically. No, you don't understand. This noise follows me. Wherever I go in the apartment, the sound moves with me. If I go to the bathroom, it follows me there, but the moment I leave the apartment, it stops. I was skeptical, of course. Saying my disbelief, my friend got annoyed and insisted I spend the night at his place to see for myself. I was about to decline, but then I remembered the weekend was coming up and we hadn't hung out in years. Plus, if I really experienced something supernatural, it'd make for a great story. So that Friday, I arrived at his apartment after work. His older brother wasn't home, so it was just the 2 of us. After dinner, we spent hours gaming, and honestly, I'd completely forgotten about the whole ghost story. We played until around midnight, then put down our phones to get ready for bed. It was only then that I remembered the supposed haunting. I perked up my ears and waited, but there was nothing. We waited until well past 1 a.m., and still, there was no sound. My friend was puzzled. Usually, it starts right on time, he said. I teased him for making up ghost stories and went to bed. Before lying down, I took off the obsidian Buddha pendant I'd been wearing, a souvenir I brought back from a trip to Hainan. Since it was blessed at a temple, I avoided wearing it while sleeping. But the moment I lay down, something strange happened. My ears started ringing, loudly and persistently. It was so intense that it felt like someone was screaming directly into my ears. Then, like clockwork, the sound of marbles dropping and high heels clicking started echoing from upstairs. My heart raced. Could this really be happening? I got out of bed and cautiously walked to the living room. Sure enough, the high heels followed me. Panicking, I moved to my friend's bedroom door, and the noise followed again. My friend, now awake, suggested we test it further. Together, we walked to the kitchen, then the bathroom, then come back to the living room. And the clicking heels followed us every step of the way. Meanwhile, my ears were ringing the entire time. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and stepped outside. Instantly, the sound stopped and the ringing in my ears also vanished. Standing at the door, I asked my friend, "Do you ever get ear ringing when this happens?" He nodded. "Yeah, I did at first, but I've gotten used to it." Frustrated, I stepped back inside, and the noises returned immediately. Then I had an idea. "Let's split up," I told my friend. "You head to the bathroom, and I'll go to the bedroom." Let's see who it follows. We went our separate ways, but this time, the high heel sounds didn't follow either of us. Instead, it stayed in one spot, as if pacing back and forth. Suddenly, the eerie silence was broken by a cat's shrill cry from outside the window. We both froze. Then, from my room, we heard a loud thud, as if something had fallen to the floor. In that instant, the high heel sounds, the cat cries, and the ringing in my ears all stopped. Terrified, I tiptoed into the bedroom and found my obsidian pendant lying on the floor. Somehow, it had fallen out of my bag. I quickly put it back on, and for the rest of the night, everything was quiet. The next morning, I told my friend, "This place is definitely strange, you should move." But due to financial constraints, he couldn't. He later told me he got a blessed pendant of his own, and maybe, just maybe, things have settled down since then. Honestly, I've never seen someone so calm about being haunted. He even suggested running experiments. But tell me, is it possible the high-heeled ghost wasn't walking on the floor at all? Maybe she was walking on the ceiling the whole time, following him wherever he went, like this. Before I turned 4, I lived with my grandmother in the countryside. She often said I was difficult to raise as a child, crying incessantly no matter who tried to comfort me. When I finally started speaking, the first phrase I ever said was, "Lily, come here." Oddly, this was the only thing I could say for a long time, even though no one in the family had a name that sounded remotely like Lily. My grandmother, worried I might have been haunted by some kind of spirit, sought out a medium for help. The medium advised my family to find a tree in the mountains that I had a connection with and to recognize it as my godmother. Doing so, the medium assured, would protect me as I grew up. As unbelievable as it sounded, subsequent events proved it to be true. The village where my grandmother lived was a small, remote place with only about 30 households, surrounded on 3 sides by dense forests. A single road connected the village to the nearby town, making it feel isolated from the world. People living there had a natural reverence for the forests, so much so that they avoided venturing out after sunset. Even livestock were brought back to their pens before dark. Like the others, I was also terrified of the forest, especially knowing that my tree mother resided there. It felt like the woods were full of lurking monsters. Interestingly, I wasn't the only one with such a peculiar connection. Many children in the village had godparents from the animal or plant world, such as foxes or weasels. My distant cousin, for instance, had a fox mother. When my cousin was young, he was extremely frail and even had a near-death experience. A medium advised his family to find a fox in the forest and make it his godmother. But finding a fox was no easy task. It required venturing deep into the woods, often taking an entire day. Yet, determined to save the child, a group of hunters voluntarily formed a team and accompanied my cousin's family into the woods. They set out early in the morning to ensure they could return before nightfall. The forest was vast, with trees that all looked alike. The experienced hunters followed familiar paths, yet by noon, they had found no sign of a fox. At this point, the lead hunter insisted they had to turn back. Otherwise, once night fell, they truly wouldn't be able to find their way out. Before leaving, they conducted a ritual, offering steamed buns and other items to appease the mountain gods and spirits. The hunters carefully marked their trail on the way out, noting landmarks such as burial mounds to avoid getting lost. However, as they retraced their steps, some of the mounds they had seen earlier had vanished. While this could have been a memory error, their journey took a troubling turn. They walked the entire afternoon and evening but couldn't find their way out. Despite following their markers, they seemed to be wandering in circles. Ultimately, they decided to spend the night in the forest. When they woke the next morning, they were shocked to find themselves lying in the yard of a villager's house. To this day, no one has been able to explain their story. However, my grandmother believed they had already left the forest but were tricked by something that clouded their vision and judgment. She said it was only thanks to the protection of the mountain god earned through their early offerings that they survived the ordeal. Despite this close call, my cousin's family didn't give up. They chose another auspicious day to try again, this time taking an even more seasoned hunter with them. The hunter brought along a dog, which quickly led them to a fox den. Unluckily, they didn't see any foxes, even after waiting by the entrance for half a day. In the end, they left an elaborate offering at the den, reciting my cousin's birth date in hopes the fox would accept him as the god's son. Strangely, the incense burned quickly, which the group took as a good omen. It meant the fox had accepted their request. Sure enough, from that point on, my cousin never felt seriously ill and remained healthy all the way into adulthood. Yet it seems his bond with the fox didn't end even after he grew up. In 2018, my cousin achieved excellent grades and was admitted to Heilongjiang University, a remarkable accomplishment for someone from our small town. However, just as he was settling into university life, an incident nearly cost him his life. Below his dormitory building was a basketball court, and my cousin, a skilled player, often gathered with friends for games after class. One day, while playing an intense match, he suddenly slipped. Looking down, he saw a crisp 100-yuan bill under his foot. Surprised and a little thrilled, he picked it up. Out of courtesy, he asked around to see if anyone had lost it, but none of his friends claimed it. In fact, no one even had money on them at the time, so nobody knew where this bill came from. There's a superstition in our region. If you find money on the ground, you should spend it quickly and never take it home. Otherwise, bad luck might follow. So, taking no chances, my cousin decided to treat his friends to a barbecue that evening. Everyone was excited and headed back to the dorm to freshen up. But when they regrouped to leave, my cousin reached into his pocket only to find the money was gone. He distinctly remembered putting it there. How could it vanish so suddenly after just a quick trip upstairs? Determined not to ruin the mood, he still treated his friends to dinner, paying out of his own pocket. The incident seemed to end there, or so he thought. But the next day, something even stranger happened. That afternoon, he was again on the basketball court. After playing for a while, he took a break and sat under an unused basketball hoop with a few female classmates. Suddenly, a small white dog emerged from the nearby bushes. The girls were immediately drawn to the adorable pup and convinced my cousin to help them catch it. At first, he declined, but the dog sat on the path, staring directly at him as if waiting for him to follow. Intrigued, he finally gave in and approached the dog. Each time he got close, the dog would run a short distance, stop, and look back, seemingly guiding him further. Just as he stepped off the court, a deafening crash echoed behind him. Turning around, he saw the basketball hoop he had been resting under moments ago had collapsed, smashing into the ground where he had been sitting. The entire scene left everyone in shock. Campus staff rushed over to evacuate the area, but my cousin stood frozen. Realizing how narrowly he had escaped death, he instinctively looked toward the little dog, only to find that its pointy snout and narrow eyes revealed its true identity. It was no ordinary dog, but a white fox. When he shared the story with our family, we were convinced that the money he found was likely death money, a cursed offering used in certain rituals to shift misfortune or illness onto an unsuspecting stranger. The white fox, believed to be his fox mother from childhood, must have intervened to save his life. In some places, there's a practice where families of terminally ill individuals or those who have died unjustly use enchanted money to transfer their misfortune. They smear ash from ritual incense on the bills and leave them in public places. And whoever picks up the money inadvertently takes on the illness or misfortune. Similarly, this method can also be used for other sinister purposes, such as finding a spiritual bride or groom for the deceased, a topic we discussed in the previous episode. But it's a form of dark magic, and if the person who picks up the money manages to break the spell, the practitioner suffers severe consequences. So, if you ever visit China and spot a red envelope or money lying on the ground, resist the urge to pick it up. And if you do find money, spend it quickly, don't take it with you. Okay, that wraps up this week's story. Next week is our Christmas special, and I can't wait to celebrate it together for the first time. Be sure to grab your snacks and cozy blankets as we dive into chilling tales set on snowy nights. See you then.